Well, yeah, shoot. I guess let's just strap in and get to it. And if you've been watching us so far, you know that we like to do a little recap. And in the case of Critical Role, we tried to do a pretty in-depth one because it's such long content, keep you caught up. And we actually have been kind of cutting out the recap from this discussion and uploading that separately as well. So if you happen to be watching just this recap right now, hello from the past. And if you enjoyed the recap, great, thank you. But if you are interested in hearing our larger discussion on the episode, that will be linked in the little description box below. So
Solid.
Yeah, without further ado, I guess let's just jump into it. And
let's do it.
All right, I'll start us off here. So the episode basically started. We had everyone still at the Fire Ashari, and Locathar has just asked them, to go back to Amon, talk to Gilmore, see if they can figure out what's going on with this rune. But alas, everyone still basically has the targets on their backs from Posca and the Nameless Ones. So like, how are we going to get back to Amon and do this? So, they spend some time basically strategizing on what they're going to do. Come up with some different plans. There's some poor rolls on the side of Dariax to try to, give them a streets level knowledge idea. But they ultimately decide, okay, you know what? Let's just kind of do our hair in a little bit of different way, try to disguise ourselves a little bit, and we'll have Dariax perform a distraction at the gates, and the rest of us will sneak in while he's doing that. Dariax is all for that. He's game. And the only other little tidbit I wanted to mention in this section was, like I said, the characters with long hair, which is basically Opal, Dorian, and Fern, all do their hair up in a different way. And then Aurum, who's got like a buzz cut, real short hair, can't really change his. So Fern cuts off her hair, and Opal uses her hair glue to try to give him an updo. But yeah. The aspect I really loved from this is Aurum mentions that he uses the one spell that he knows. Oh gosh, what is it called? Druid shape. Thank you. Druid shape to kind of make it look nicer, and that's innocuous enough, but it's kind of an Easter egg for something from campaign 1 that I don't want to like get into spoiler territory on. But for those of you that know, I loved that little shout out, little flavor moment, and perhaps we'll talk about it later in the episode if we want to, but I won't dive into the weeds on it here.
Yeah, there is one tiny detail, and there was the conversation between Robbie and Abria where he was clarifying, just to make sure we didn't do anything here, right? We didn't actually resolve anything. And Abria's like, yeah, that's about right. And he's like nothing. We didn't, solve anything. And then Matt Mercer goes, yeah, hero stuff, which I thought was a great final line before they moved on to the next section.
That is great.
Yeah, which I'll jump into and describe the next part if that's okay. Well, so like Will mentioned, they decided they're going to go back to Iman to visit Gilmore. And as they arrive at this, it's a different gate that they're arriving to compared to the one that they left in. And Dariax he asks Fern for any ribbons that she may have that can help facilitate his plan. And Abria has Ashley Johnson's role, has a great role, and has this great line of how Fern is just somehow pulling out all of these ribbons. Like it never seems to end. So there's plenty of ribbons. And Dariax takes these ribbons and he transforms himself into this beautiful exuberantly clad half-elf woman. And he reveals this is an ex of his, and he is now going by the name Tharla Star, who's this performer and he's just great. It's just so funny. He's communicating with the locals, kind of performing with his glitz and glam. Opal actually mentions, I think I've met this person once in Byrodin, which is where she's from.
Yeah.
So Dariax waltzes in, he starts to troll these streamers that he's created and makes this huge show so the rest of the party can sneak in. The negative, though, is that this distraction, although it's a success, Dorian and Fern, they fail miserably on their stealth checks. In fact, Fern has a disadvantage on stealth checks. And so because they fail to sneak in, they decide to join in on the distraction. So Dorian gives Fern his flute while he pulls out his lute, and they join in and begin to play as sort of like the ensemble band to Dariax's performance. It's an amazing scene.
It was.
Dorian casts Thunderclap at the end of the performance to create like this big booming effect to finish it off. And then the three decide to try to slip back into the crowd to meet up with Opal and Aurum. However, someone grabs Dariax's arm as they try to leave, and it's this tall, black-skinned tiefling named Edward, who wants to know if Dariax, or excuse me, Tharla, wants to come work as a performer. I don't remember the name of the club, but it's in the erudite quarter of Iman. Fern steps in and is not clarifies that she's not his agent, but is like, well, how much are you going to pay for this? What's this going to look like? I don't want my friend to be taken advantage of. And they say it starts at 5 gold a performance, but they're willing to negotiate. Whereas Dariax basically says, hey, can you stop touching me so much? Like, you're very handsy. Like, if you could just relax on grabbing me so much. But other than that, he really has no concept of like how the negotiation is going. Anyway, beyond this, before the party has this performance has ended, Opal and Aurum, they actually decide they want to help with the distraction. And Opal, and I actually skipped this, Opal decides to pretend that she's lost her daughter. And so she's like, help, help, my daughter's missing. And so the crowdspeople start like yelling this. And then it's like, oh crap. Like, this is creating like a very big effect. And so immediately she turns and says, Nancy. And Aurum says, like in this totally expressionless, like, are you kidding me? Because he's a halfling and has, you know, his little druid shape hair. And he says, mother, yes, here I am.
You found me.
And so he pretends to be the missing girl. And Opal rolls deception at a disadvantage to try to play this off and gets double natural 20s. And everyone falls for it. So the funny thing about this scene, they were trying to be as subtle as possible getting into town, and it created this massive, bombastic set of distractions that they even say like, hey, this was like the opposite of what we wanted to happen. And so as they're talking about this, they're trying to slip away, and they're talking about, hey, that was really obviously done rather than being very subtle. And right that moment, coincidentally, Fern gets hit with a poison dart and begins to feel funny. And they actually do see a cloaked figure in the distance who they can tell is looking at someone else, and they realize that they are being followed. So they duck off into an alleyway to try to get away. They hear footsteps behind them. Dariax basically disguises himself again as an old homeless beggar dwarf. And the people who are pursuing them ask what he's seen, and he says, oh yeah, I saw the party. They bumped right into me. They're so, obnoxious. And he basically points them in a totally different direction, says they're going over the roof on the other side of a different building. And so they decide to wrap around to try to cut them off, which is not even the direction they're going. So basically they lose their people following them. And basically once they are sure they're not being followed, then they finally head to Gilmore's. Yes. And my esteemed co-host, why don't you take it from there?
All right, yeah, and bro, Matt Mercer was just the MVP of that whole section. It was amazing.
He had a lot of fun, for sure.
All right, but so they narrowly avoid, getting captured, getting caught, or whatever. And once the coast is clear, they make their way inside to Gilmore's. And I think for all of them, this is the first time they've ever been inside of it, and it is a glorious, pun intended, I guess. Amazing mystical shop, 3 stories high, has lots of amazing magical items, clothes, just lots of curiosities, and Opal just can't even contain herself. She immediately loses all track of what they're even there for, and she just starts diving into the clothes, being like, oh my gosh, you have this in pink, like I need to get this. And a young gnomish clerk of the store, and I don't remember if I'm pronouncing this right, but Inanna walks up to her and is like, hey, how can I help you? And Opal's like, can you find me this in pink? And then Dariax, kind of reminds her why they're there, and is like, hey, actually we're here to speak to Sean Gilmore. And Anna lets them know that he is a very busy man, very famous man. He's not here right now. And they're like, oh, okay. And Dariax then makes a high persuasion roll and is like, this is important. And she's like, okay, well, I'll go get the manager and we'll see what, she can do for you. So the party is then brought to Sherry, who is a half elven woman, who also tells them that, hey, Gilmore's not available. She kind of pegs them as, kind of like touristy would-be
Hmm.
adventurers that are just looking to, meet somebody famous, as it were.
Hmm.
But then they kind of tell her what's going on, let her know that they're coming from the Fire Ashari. There's this weird rune that popped up, and Lorcathar asked Gilmore's help on this matter. And so at that point, Sherry realizes, okay, this is more than just, some nobodies. And she grabs a book of runic symbols and starts flipping through it, asking, hey, all right, tell me about this rune. And I think they still have a photo, or not a photo, but a drawing
Drawing.
that
Yeah.
they show her. And so she takes that, looks through the book for a while, and is not able to find anything. And she realizes that she's kind of out of her depth here. And she lets them know, like, okay, you know what? If you're wasting his time, you're gonna have to deal with me. And he's much nicer than me. So like, just kind of warns them. And then she's like, all right, follow me. And they go to the back, and she does this really cool little flavor moment, where she writes on a parchment and then like puts it into a candle, and it immolates, uh, with the implication being that she was sending a message to Gilmore. Um, a few minutes or a few seconds later, they kind of feel this like mystical pulse of energy from upstairs, and shortly thereafter, Gilmore appears and kind of leans over the railing and is, his charismatic self, and like,
Hmm.
oh, what do we have going on here? And you rang, and Sherry says, they can take it from there, and the party makes their way up and officially meets Gilmore, which again, just such an amazing moment. I'll hold all my thoughts on it for now, though. So just like me, the party is basically starstruck over seeing him in the flesh, and most of all of them are at least familiar with him, have at least heard of the name. With some of them being, like Orm, for example, intimately familiar with him and the legends of his time in this past era of Taldore, knowing that he was a friend of Vox Machina, and even went with them on some of their adventures. And Orm actually even reveals here, and this was a big thing, especially for people that have followed campaign 1 and 2, that Gilmore is actually a secret member of the Taldori Council, which that was a pretty cool thing. And I know Ashley was freaking out when they said that. But so anyway, the party quickly make their introductions, and they kind of catch Gilmore up on everything that's going on with them. Posca, the Nameless Ones, the Circlet, the Rune in the Ash Hole, and even mention their like kind of missing memories from this past week with the crater and everything. And also in this time, we learned that Gilmore is married to a man named Darius. And anyway, so after they get caught up and introduced and everything, Gilmore casts Lesser Restoration on Fern, to remove her poison effect. Uh, and Dariax then takes out the circlet to show him and kind of get his opinion on it. And so Gilmore, being the wise man that he is, uses Mage Hand to grab it from him and doesn't actually touch it himself, because they let him know that, hey, yeah, Dariax touched it and his eyes are black. And I loved this because Dariax finally finds out, like somebody finally
Right.
tells him that his eyes are black, and he's like, "What? My eyes are black?"
Yeah. He's like, yeah. Wait, what?
Yeah, it was amazing, and I love Matt's
Yeah.
like dedication to like not metagaming that he knew.
Right.
But so Dariax, finding this out, takes a look in the mirror, and he sees his eyes are jet black, but then he also sees, in the reflection of all of his friends and himself, like spiders skittering across everyone's face, like out of their ear
Hmm.
and into their mouth, or like into Gilmore's beard. And this is quite unsettling to Dariax. He's like, "You got an infestation or something going on here." And they quickly put it together that he's seeing things, and it's because of this circlet that he touched. And Gilmore then kind of, uh I don't know if he cast Identify or not, now that I'm thinking about it, but he knows what it is.
Hmm.
Opal even tells him about the vision she had about it with the Spider Queen leg and everything, and he's like, yes,
Hmm.
this is indeed a vestige of divergence of the Spider Queen, and the Spider Queen is evil, but he says the vestige is just power. It's not necessarily evil, just, it depends on how you use it. and he asks, Gilmore asks, "So did you put this on?" And Dariax is like, "No, should I?" And I love that moment. And they even talked about maybe putting it on in Gilmore's presence to just like see what would happen, and they didn't do it, but I really wish they would
Fern,
have.
yeah, Fern says, I think you should, like, just to see what happens. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, this is going to happen. Anyway, sorry.
No, I wish it had. I'm still fingers crossed that somebody does put it on.
Yeah.
But anyway, he lets them know what it is, that it is a vestige, and that actually he knew that this was making its way here via the Blight Star to be delivered to an archmage friend of his for study. So he's very appreciative that our party trusted him with this information, and he lets them know that he is willing and capable to take it off their hands and make sure it remains safe and gets to where it needs to be, and that he will give them 5,000 gold store credit for their trouble. The party's not sure what they want to do though. With specifically, I believe Dorian and Fern wanting to keep it because they found it. They feel like it's as important and powerful. Like they think they should have it. However, they do recognize the danger of holding on to it. It has painted a very large target on their backs. And Gilmore recognizes this as well, but he understands, and he even makes a comment of recognizing a pattern beginning again, and he says that vestiges kind of go where they're meant to be, and I love that because I took it as a recognition of like, oh, these are adventurers, and I personally know adventurers that have vestiges, and they kind of fate will them where they will be. So he does tell them though, like, here, be right back, and he grabs this magical box and he says, hey, if you change your mind, you want me to have this, just simply put the circlet in the box, close it, and it will be teleported to me. And he lets them know that this is a one-way teleportation box, and it also can only be used one time. So it's like a last-ditch option for them if they decide they need to get their hands off of it. So the party's excited about that. And the one last thing on the circlet is Gilmore can fix Dariax's eyes, but before he does it, he's like, "Are you just gonna touch it again?" And Dariax is like, "No." And,
yeah, the worst lie. No.
Yeah. And he's like, "Okay, whatever." And Gilmore fixes his eyes as well. So after they've gotten all that circlet nonsense settled, they begin to talk about the ash hole and the rune. That it was the main reason they have brought them there. So they give Gilmore the runic drawing that they had also just given Sherry, and he places it up to his forehead where Gilmore has a like runic symbol in the middle of his forehead, and then also one appears on his back of his hand, and they can tell that he is casting a very high level spell. And after he does this, he lets them know that this magic is very old magic, ancient magic that he is unfortunately unfamiliar with. However, he does have books that speak of such things, and they reference an area south of Byroden called the Ruins of Conera. I should have looked up what they said in the episode before we did this.
As Dariax says, the ruins of Quinceanera.
Yeah. Which
and Abria's like, yes.
I love that. It's such a meta moment because they in campaign 1 and 2 they do that to Matt all the time, just like troll his names that he comes up with. So it was just so sweet to see him do that. So he tells them about the ruins of Quinceanera, and that there is this old culture that existed there even before the calamity. So we're talking like ancient. And he wants to send them there because maybe they can find some information about this, shed some light on this. And Opal actually makes a history check on, I'm just going to call it the Quinceanera to save face here, the Quinceanera. Sure. And she too remembers that, oh yeah, this is old, and that her dad once tried to go there. And he came back naked and afraid. And everyone was like, what? And she's like, I don't know. That's just what happened.
Yeah. Fern's like, why was he so scared? And why did they take his clothes? Or like, what happened to his clothes?
Who knows? We certainly didn't get an answer. And So Gilmore says, okay, so yeah, do this, and don't worry, I'll pay you for this because, it is a service to all of Tal'Dorei to figure out what's going on here. And he's like, I personally know that, fledgling adventurers need support in the early years, so I'm happy to do this for you. And Opal at that point tries to convince him to come with them, like, hey,
Oh
you
my
should come.
gosh.
She's
Yeah.
been flirting with him the whole time. And but she fails the persuasion check, and he's like, that type of adventuring is for you young folk. I'm in a different stage of life. And then funnily we find out that Fern is 112 years old. So
Mhm.
I actually don't know if that's old for like a, a fauna or whatever she is, but everyone's like, what? And anyway, so he's like, I'm not gonna come with you, but do this for me, pay you, yada yada yada. And Dorian's like, hey, can you help us get out of town though? Because we still got a lot of this heat on our backs, and you know, don't really know how we're gonna get to this place. And he's like, yeah, we'll get you a cart. Um, boom, boom, bada boom. But he's like, but hey, first, you're in my shop. Are you gonna spend some freaking money? And they're like, yes, we shall do it. And but Dariax says, hey, but can we get the friends discount? And he actually rolls a 22 on his persuasion. So Gilmore's reluctantly like, okay, yeah, I can't resist a pretty face. You guys can have the friends discount.
Mhm.
And that basically ends the big discussion they have with Gilmore, and it leads us into the shopping spree section of the episode, which I'm running out of air in my lungs, my friend. If you would like to take over.
Sure. Yeah. So, yeah, everyone, the next set of several minutes are basically each character buying the things that they want. And random detail, I'm assuming they were looking at like a shopping list they were given in terms of what was in stock.
Yeah, I
because
think so.
they were reading things off that they had seen. One thing right off the bat before they go like down out of Gilmore's office area is Fern does see this beautiful tea set in the room and says that she's a collector of things like this, and even says, hey, I was going to just steal it, but I thought I'd ask if I could have it. And Gilmore says, okay, you can have it if you promise to have tea with me sometime. And she says, yes, I will. So he gives that to her and then says, okay, nothing else you can have. So get out and go buy stuff. So a lot happens from this point forward. So I'll kind of talk about each character. Dorian gathers a bunch of different things, and he goes to the checkout counter, which I'm pretty sure I couldn't tell if Sherry was helping him check out, and then Inanna was helping Orem, who we'll talk about in a second.
Yeah.
So I think it's Sherry, or it's this other really easily annoyed clerk in the store. But Dorian basically drops off these, I think it's 5 potions of healing, a bag of caltrops, some ball bearings, smoke grenades, a pan flute, and an immovable rod on the counter, and says, hey, how much is all this going to be? Which the players have, when they looted the Blight Star, they actually got, I think it was 500 platinum, which ended up being 5,000 gold.
Right.
And they split that up in even ways. And so I mention this because all of them are going to be putting stuff on the counter, so to speak, and hoping that it's basically less than 1,000 gold. So it gets tallied up, and it's 2,200 gold. And he says, well, and for friends? And he's told, well, the friends discount, which is basically 20%, was already applied. Well, he's like, yeah, but for friends? And just keeps pushing this till finally he starts yelling, like literally like annoyingly yelling for Gilmore, being like, Karen. Gilmore. Yeah, super Karen. And Sherry's like really frustrated by this. Like, come on, really? So, but because it seems that Gilmore has a thing for bards, he's trying to press that to his favor. So Gilmore finally calls down and is like, what is it? And basically tells Dorian, hey, if you're broke, then don't buy, which it's actually 6 potions of healing. Then with this sad face persuasion roll of a 19, Gilmore says to Sherry, okay, go ahead and knock off one of the potions of healings off the price. But even with this, he still doesn't have enough gold. And so Orem and Opal both grab one of the potions, and the rest are getting put away. And Darren kind of goes about his business really for the rest of the shopping spree, seeing everyone else get a better discount than he got. And he's like, so are you kidding me? Like, come on. Yeah. Which we find out that Sherry basically admits, well, you called my boss, so I'm not willing to do you any favors. We see Opal. She does get, I think it's Inanna comes up and says, hey, we actually did have this in pink. and gets this pink cloak that she wanted for 10 gold, which, not very subtle, but hey, that's her style. Gets the potion of healing and buys it for 175. It was typically 250. Also wants a whip, which is 1,000 gold, and Dariax says, "Hey, I'll pitch in and help you buy it." And Opal says, "Yeah, we'll even use it together." And he's like, "I'll never use a whip ever, but I will help." And she also says, "Hey, what's the most powerful thing I can get for 200 gold?" And it's like, well, in the shop where like all the valuable stuff is like several hundred, you could have an amber gem.
Yeah.
And the prices here get a little confusing. Even Abria's kind of like, okay, how much is that? And Abria actually eventually says, "Okay, guys, I think I've hit my limit on like doing mental math. So as long as it's under 1,000, like we're good. I'm gonna trust you for the rest." And she actually does say, "Hey, does anyone want to like save their gold? Like, does anyone want to like hang on to your gold?" And they're all like, "Nah, like let's just spend it all." So anyway, Orem then he realizes that magical really isn't like his style. And so he goes over to the weaponry and armor, and he asks about this shield, and it's a sentinel shield that Gilmore's made himself. And Anana mentions that it's the only one left in the store and it's going to go very quickly. So he likes it, but he says, "Hey, I really like my current shield." And he asks, "Hey, could you hold on to it for me so that when I come back here, I could get it back?" Because it's like from, I don't know if it was like a family heirloom or just from his town.
Yeah.
But Anana has this idea and says, "Hey, let's actually go ask Gilmore to enchant it. And we can take the enchantment of the Sentinel shield and apply it to your shield." And so they go up. Gilmore's like, "What do you need?" And they ask for this to happen. And Gilmore says, "Sure." And he says something like, I think Orem says, "Well, wait, before you do it, I don't want to like be in debt to you. Like, how much is it going to cost?" And he says, "Oh, I think he says I have 1,200 gold." And he goes, "Sure, that's enough." Norm's like, "Okay, here is all of it." And Gilmore's like, "Okay, you're very naive." And there's this kind of running theme of him pointing out, you guys are so new at this. You're obviously very young adventurers. So, hey, keep a little bit of your gold. I'll do it for 800. And so Orem also grabs one of the potions to add on to this that Dorian couldn't afford. Fern keeps asking about this ring called Stonky's ring.
Yeah.
And Anana's never heard of it, says they didn't make it. It appears to have some sort of telekinetic abilities, but it's really not clear the full power of what this ring is. They assume that someone must have left it there, and Anana decides, yes, we'll sell it to you for 600 gold. She also buys the ring of truth telling, and actually, I couldn't remember if she bought it or just asked about it, but that one was 500 gold. Do you remember?
It was. I was really confused about a few things. I think even Robbie as Dorian was kind of confused on what he was actually buying, because I feel like they kind of like missed some signals a few times. So yeah, I don't know. I think we'll maybe have to find out going forward what actually was purchased.
Yeah. Dorian gives his pan flute to Fern and asks for his flute back, which he still had from their performance, and mentions that it's a family heirloom. And Fern actually plays the pan flute. And like I mentioned, they're all sort of really emptying out their gold to get these supplies that they need. And there's even this funny moment where like the clerk or Sherry, whoever, basically says, "I think I'm pretty much done with you guys." And basically a new guy comes up and says, "Okay, hey guys, we have like, let's wrap this up and be done with this because I'm personally done with you guys being in the store." And like I mentioned, Abria is even like, "Hey guys, like we just reached the end of my personal patience for a shopping episode. Yeah. So let's be done." So they grab all their stuff, and I'll hand it back to you to finish this up.
Yeah. Yeah, so they get all their things, and then they basically exit the store, and Gilmore indeed has a cart waiting for them to get out. And I know the party was a bit confused. They're like, "Okay, we need to go to Byrodin." And the guy driving the cart was like, "Yeah, I could take you to the edge of the city, but that's about all my job entails." And so like, "Okay," but he's like, "But you can, where I'm taking you to the gate, like you can find a ride there." So they're like, "Okay, cool." And the driver kind of picks up on the fact that they are trying to lay low. So he's like, "Am I gonna die?" And they're like, "Oh no, you're gonna be fine. Don't worry about it." And so, anyways, they set off, and the party, to give you an idea of the cart, it's like a closed cart, and the party is like inside the wagon or caravan, whatever the word would be, and the driver's outside. Anyway, so riding through the city pretty uneventfully for about 30 minutes when the cart suddenly comes to a stop. They hear some arguing outside, and then it goes quiet. About a couple minutes later, they just feel, somebody get back into the cart, and they start moving again. Um, Thinking this is a bit weird, Orem eventually sticks his head out of the wagon to see if he can see what's going on, and he notices the driver is now wearing some red leathers, and he recognizes it to be Posca. Um, and then, like, as he's doing this, basically an arrow comes flying at him, and he just in the nick of time whips out of the way as a bolt like sticks into the side of the wagon, right where he was, and he realizes that there are some nameless ones also flanking the cart. So he ducks back inside, lets everybody know what's going on, and the party basically debates, okay, like what do we do? They consider just stabbing her in the butt because there's apparently like a window from where they are so they can see the driver. And as they're talking about that, Posca's like, I can hear you, right? Like this isn't a soundproof wagon.
Mhm.
I can hear everything you're saying. And so they're like, oh crap, what do we do? And so they basically just start a conversation with her. And Posca's like, where are my things? You stole from me. Residuum, circlet, I want it back. And they basically let her know that, hey, sorry, we don't have any more. We sold it to Gilmore just a minute ago. So, you know, sorry, it's off our hands. And this makes her very angry, and she lets them know, well, you know what? Gilmore may be this legendary figure, but everyone sleeps, and I will get my items back, essentially threatening him. And the party's like, well, ooh, we don't want to get Gilmore in trouble. So, like, what do we do? And ultimately, Fern kind of just makes the rogue move and says, I cast Charm Person. And she tries to charm Posca, and it is successful. I don't remember the exact rolls, but I think it was like it was a 14 to save from it, and Posca rolled a 13. So it was like super close, something like that. And so anyway, Posca is charmed. Fern now has control of her, and she's like, "Hey, we're on an important mission. You and your nameless ones need to step aside and let us go, or else you're gonna die." And it's like kind of like a dramatic pause for a second, and then Posca gets off the cart. Um, Fern hops out with her and is like, "Hey, thank you." And notices when she does that that they are like surrounded. There's like 20 or 30 people that were there, like potentially, presumably waiting to ambush them. And it was people of all different ages, genders, races, and stations in life. Like there were even some guards there. There were some little kids. So it's like the influence of the nameless ones goes far
Mhm.
and wide. So they get off the cart, and Orem's like, hey, try to get some of this heat off Gilmore while you've got control of her. And so Fern's like, hey, you know what? Trying to press that. And Posca's like, well, if he has my items, I'm going to get them back. And so the loophole to that is like, Fern is like, yeah, if he has them, then cool, because they know that Gilmore doesn't actually have them. So Fern jumps back on the cart, and they make their way out, unhaltered, abate. What's the word? Undisturbed. We'll just go with that. They make their way out, no longer, in the nameless one's no longer a problem. And as they're going away, Dariax basically takes the crown, which I guess he touches it again, touches the crown, leans out the window, and is like, "Hey, Posca, gotcha," and basically letting her know that, hey, Gilmore doesn't have it, we have it, and we just pulled one over on you. And Posca, I think, screams in that moment, but presumably she was still charmed, but maybe it was just like a flavor moment. But apparently she's furious, and they head out of town, and Orem, still wanting to, warn Gilmore, decides to write a quick note explaining everything that just happened. He throws it in that magical box that Gilmore gave them, closes it, so the note is teleported to Gilmore. Now the box is, you know, a dud, won't do anything anymore. And quickly thereafter, Orem receives a magical message from Gilmore saying, like, hey, thank you. And that's basically where the episode ends. And there's no post credit scene this time.
Mhm.